Okay, so what do we got here? This is only going to give me a rough measurement, but it'll be good enough for my purposes. So I've got about 11.98 millimetres between the tips of these things here. It's pretty much bouncing back to where I started from, so I'm not stretching it quite far enough. The problem is, when it yields, it'll just go with a bump probably. Well, that's certainly much more. Let's see how it sits. That's nice, that just dropped over there. And let's check the action of that pointer. That's nice and free. That seems quite good. Okay, so I'm quite happy with the state of that now. How that came to be tight on there, I could only put that down to rough handling perhaps in a previous service. I'll clean this piece. Now this has got a little bit of corrosion on that pointer. I want to see if that'll just rub off. Yeah, it looks a little bit rough on the point there. I'll just I'm not so concerned that it looks corroded. I'm concerned if it's got lumps and bumps of corrosion on it that might rub on things. Okay, so it doesn't look as pretty as I'd like on that point on the outside, so what I'm going to do is scrape that off clean and give that a wipe with some red paint. Just scraping away any corrosion there too. Okay, so I'll touch that up with a spot of red paint and then reassemble things once it's all dry. Alright, well this is all painted up. Well, the paint's had time to dry on this pointer now, so I'll drop that into position. I've got to get it spring hooked up here. I've also got to get it timed correctly. So this one's hard up against stop. This one needs to be in the same position. See if I can get that spring hooked up. I may have to do it this way. Oops, I'll pop the spring off the other one now. Wee bit. Let's get back to this back where it belongs. Yeah, that's larger diameter spring needs to be sitting lower on the post than that. Yeah, keep an eye on which spring you're putting back in which place. The large diameter spring goes on the first of the pointers you're putting back in place. Cam follower seated? I don't know that it is. That's better. It's seated correctly now. Let's get this back in place. Make sure that spring's not trapped underneath. That's better. So that's all sitting there at the moment. That looks pretty promising to me. I'm just checking the action to make sure that those two pointers come and meet in the middle evenly. And they appear to. So that's good. Just a little bit of fluff there. It's probably come off one of the cotton buds I've been using to clean things. Okay, that part looks good. We're not done here because I've got to put the this piece back on. So I'll clean that. It sits on there. There's a cutout there clear those gears, so you can see that. Right, so put that to one side. I want to deal with this piece. So we just need to give this a quick clean, but mostly I want to remove these screws that hold these little keepers in place and get this brass cam out so we can clean everything and make sure that's moving smoothly. At the moment, it just feels a bit rough in one spot in particular, but I want to get this so it moves smoothly. And I'll just give that a light wipe with the molybdenum paste. If you leave it completely unlubricated, it will certainly work. Often it doesn't create any unusual drag, often it's quite good from that regard, but it'll often rattle. You'll get a chatter noise as you move the focus. So I'm just looking in that groove to see if there's anything obvious in the way of contamination, and there's not. So we'll clean this. And clean all these surfaces. There's little trace of marks where corrosion has been on these surfaces. So it means that this lens certainly was splashed at some stage. It doesn't take much. You only need a drop of spray or something to land on a surface, and it'll do its work. Over time you'll end up with corrosion there. I'll just put a little bit of cotton that I've stolen from a cotton bud there and get that down into that crack and wipe that through. That looks good. Let's clean up this brass ring. This has a cam surface on it. You can see here, that's where the pin of the rangefinder on a Retina IIIS camera follows that cam surface. I'll just clean all this. I'm just looking at this because we know we've got corrosion about the place. I'm just making sure that there are no spots of corrosion causing a lump that would make it tight. That all looks good. So I will take my molybdenum paste and I'll just run some round that outside surface up under the top edge there, and I'll run some on the cam surface too, where the pin for the rangefinder on a Retina IIIS camera would run. Just pop this in here and check the action. Yeah, it's smooth, it's not loose and rattly, that's just nice. So our keepers, if I can pick one of them up, yeah, these are shaped, and that little cutout, normally the little cutout is used because it clears a screw hole on the f2.8 lenses. On this lens we don't have to worry about that, so they could go on either way, but out of habit I'll put it pointing in that direction. These tweezers obviously need a bit of attention because I'm having trouble picking things up with them. Sometimes it's hard getting these screws started. This time it's going pretty good. If your tweezers suddenly get to the stage where you have trouble picking things up, it probably means that the points of the tweezers are damaged or worn in some fashion. And there are, if you do a search on YouTube, you'll find sites, watchmaking sites largely, where you'll find advice on sharpening your tweezers. Watchmakers have even more trouble than this, of course, because they're dealing with tinier stuff, which is even better at disappearing into the distance. Yeah, that gave me a fight. Alright, that's done. And again, I'll check the action, make sure it moves smoothly. That looks good. I think that can go back on the lens here. Now, if this had been an f2.8 lens, I'd put my pins in there to align this stuff while I'm assembling it. But we don't have a space or a shim to worry about moving out of line. And there's an alignment pin which pops into this hole here, and you can see it on the lens here. So that'll line everything up for us right there. So let's just try getting this straight on without any, if it'll go. Now I want to get my rangefinder coupling connected up, so I'll just move that to somewhere where I know where it is. I've lined this up with that hole, which means it needs to line up this hole here, so I'll bring the slot round to that hole there. Now I'm doing it back to front. Where are we? Yeah, that's right. What am I doing? That's better. Let's lower this into position. Seat that over its pin. Check that the focus tab dropped into that brass ring. I can check because I can see this cam moving when I move the focus ring. That tells me that's connected. Now I want to see if my depth of field pointers meet in the middle. And they do. And they're smooth and snappy in action, so that's looking good. I'll get my 4 screws back in the mount at the back here. Did one of these have red paint on it? No, not yet. We'll paint one of these red before I'm done. I usually paint the screw head opposite that red alignment mark red because it's much easier to see than the alignment mark in the side. It's also a neat trick if you've managed to mutilate one of the screws while you were taking it apart, or if somebody else had done that for you. You put the rough looking screw where you're going to paint it, and of course the paint will cover the damage, which is the same as having no damage. Okay, so that's all good. Means our lens, nice smooth focus action, depth of field pointers, nice and smooth in their action, and everything's good. So that's ready for the lens capsule to go back in. So we'll deal with this lens capsule next. So I'll start by just removing the outer helical. This is very, very sticky. Pop that down there. I'm going to clean all of this helical thread up here with naphtha. I usually put some on a cotton bud and then just wipe the surface. Don't start spraying solvents about, or you'll end up running dissolved grease all over the glass surface of the lens, and believe me, that is no fun to try and clean. But this stuff is thick and it's gooey. So this will take multiple attempts at cleaning before I can get these threads nice and clean. But it's worth taking your time to get it right. If you leave that sticky rubbish in the threads, there's nothing surer than it'll bother you at a later time. That's good, a good start on that one. Let's have a deal to this thing now. You can see the filth on this. Let's wipe that front surface first. You can see it sticking to the paper. That grease is really sticky. But, you know, I'm sure it was behaved nicely enough when whoever serviced the lens previously used that grease. I mean, I would think that they probably knew what they were doing. It's just that the grease has let them down. A lot of grease that has been used in the past has not gone well over time. I think the most famous one is the dreaded Agfa green grease, the stuff that Agfa in particular used to lubricate the lenses in their cameras, and that's famous for being trouble. It's often set just like concrete, or it's worse than concrete. It's like setting like epoxy resin. Okay, so this is, I've got most of the filth out of this, but there's still an enormous amount of drag here. So that means that there's a lot of grease trapped in those threads. I'm just applying a little bit of naphtha around there, and I'm going to work that backwards and forwards to loosen up that stuff. See, that runs nicely now, but if I let the naphtha just evaporate, we'll be back where we started. I've got that grease softened with the naphtha. Now I need to get it out of the threads, and you can see it coming away here. Here I'm in danger of getting some on the glass, so I'm playing with fire. Could I take the glass out first to avoid that being a risk? Yeah, but that has its own problems, so we won't. Let's see how we're going now. Well, that's a lot better, but I can still feel some drag there, so there's still that gummy grease is still stuck in the threads. See, that's nice and free now. That's what I want it to be like, but I know as soon as the naphtha evaporates, that'll be back to sticky unless I can get this currently suspended in naphtha grease away from that brass. Now that feels good. That's very good. So I'm going to give that one more cleaning of naphtha, and I think we're done with that. How do you know when you've got all the grease out from threads like this? Well, typically, if you reassemble the outer and inner helical together dry without adding any lubricant, if it's completely clean and there's no lubricant in there, no old grease, you'll feel a chattery sort of motion. There'll be friction there between the surfaces. It won't feel dead smooth, but it will feel free to move. That's what I've got at the moment. You can hear that noise, is like a chatter noise. I'm going to give that one wipe, I think, with that CRC Electroclean. See if that'll lift more off it. And some of the roughness too will probably just be corrosion of those threads. There's certainly a hint of green colour there, which is the colour you'd expect for corrosion on a copper alloy like brass. You can tell there's still grease around because it feels sticky on my fingers as I handle these pieces. That's good. That's a good action there now. That feels just as it should do. Right, I'm pleased with that. Now I need to see about getting this back in the mount. And the f2.8 lenses, they're easy, they'll go without a fight. These f1.9 lenses often won't. Now I'm just unscrewing the rear group here. Now that was only finger tight, which was fortunate for me. Sometimes it's more than finger tight and you will need to use a friction tool or something to get that off. Or with a lens like this, you may need to put a hose clamp on there, a Jubilee clip with a layer of leather or something inside, and use that in order so you can unscrew this. So to get these back on the camera body, the lens body, what happens is here the aperture is closed right down past where it would normally couple the range that this would allow it. So what I need to do is prop this open slightly. What I normally do is take a cotton bud and just pop it in there. Now be very careful at this stage. You don't want your cotton bud going all the way through and hitting the back of the glass because you'll probably leave a dirty mark on there you're going to then have to try and clean. But that'll just hold the aperture very slightly open and allow me to line that up with the 2 points in here that we're interested in. One is that tab here that you see rattling around as I move the connecting point on the outside, and the other one is this fixed post here. Now both of those areas really need a touch of lubricant. I'm just going to give that a wipe of molybdenum paste through the slot that the fixed post runs through, and I'm going to run the same through the slot that picks up the aperture setting piece, and then I'm going to try and get it together. So what I'm trying to do is line up the aperture setting piece here, the fixed slot here, with the fixed post here and the lever here for the aperture. And can it be done? Well, yes, of course it can be done. It's just awkward. And you've got this thing sticking out the back here to catch on everything at the same time. Alright, I did it. It just went straight into place with no arguments. So I'm going to pop that down there. That's quite happy there because we haven't got the rear group in, so there's nothing pushing it out of the mount. That'll just sit there without fighting me. I'll put some grease on this and put it back in place, and then we'll put our 3 screws in place. And the grease I'm going to use is Halimax XP optical instrument and helical grease. This is the stuff, and you need very little of it. I'm just going to get some on a toothpick, and about half a dozen spots on the helical on the inside here. I'm just putting a little daub of it. Now with grease of any sort on helicals, less is more. You do not want to put a lot of grease in there. You're just trying to lubricate those surfaces so the action is smooth. If you stick more in there, it will certainly dampen any tendency to rattle, but it will also make the action stiffer. Right, so let's get this in place. It rolls down into position. I've got it so it's just lifting the lens forward, And now I'll take my screws and washers that held everything in place. With these, you'll probably find that you have to put the washer down first and then put the screw through it. That's because the washer actually goes, there's a groove in the piece of the lens body here to the outside that washer will sit down into. So you can't just drop it in from above with the screw on it. You've got to put the washer in place, then run the screw through it. That was one. These screws are a little bit rough looking. I would say that was corrosion on them. That fits in with everything else that we've seen with this particular lens, where there's just little spots of corrosion in various places. Nothing dramatic, nothing that means that lens won't be a very good lens to use, but something undesirable all the same. And I imagine this lens has got to be 60 years old if it's a day. So, alright, so that's all in place. I'm just going to check the action of the focus, make sure it moves smoothly through its entire range, and it does. I'm going to open the aperture by pulling this tab across. I'm not going to let it snap shut. Don't let it snap shut, it's not a good thing. Just going to make sure I've blown any dust off that rear group. Run that rear group down, and I'll use a friction tool to tighten that up. That's all that's required. So our lens capsule is back in the body. Focus is nice and smooth. And this can be focused. The adjustment for the focus is the same as the adjustment I used at the tail end of the Retina Xenon 50mm f2.8 lens servicing. You can use the same procedure, or in this case, because I'm lazy and I've got a Retina Reflex 4 that I know is set up correctly, I will simply put this on the front of the camera and use the image on the focus screen as my guide to getting the lens correctly placed. Alright, I've just checked this against an infinity target, and with my images are now correctly lined at infinity in the finder, but my lens, the focus ring here, is not at its stop. So knowing that I have my lens at the infinity position, I'll loosen these three screws up and I'll move the focus scale ring round to the infinity stop, and I should be in business. So I've got to make sure I don't move this brass ring, the outer helical. I just want to move the focus scale. That's it. Retighten my screws and check again by looking out the window at my chosen target. Because I'm very fortunate here, I've got a... Yeah, that's good. That's perfect. I've got a good target up on the horizon, out the window from here, which serves me well. So now we've got a nice smooth lens, all the actions work well, and we can just close up the front of it. So the hood section goes on, it's got a little alignment tab on it, so it'll only fit in one position. Now here, this is the section that holds it in place. So you can see there's a little bit of corrosion marks around the edge there. Again, that's a sign that this lens has been splashed at some stage. And you can see a little bit of pitting and corrosion here too. Now none of that is serious, no cause for concern with that. If you wanted to pretty it up, you certainly could. You could paint that with matte black paint, for example. Now I've got to get this thread started. I'm using a toothpick to help me get that started. It's difficult to get it square to the lens. The thread's probably, well, I know it's a bit rough feeling when I took it apart. Just need to get it started really. That's it. That's started. Yes, that's in place, it's all started. Now where's my friction tool? Just drive that down the rest of the way with the friction tool. Oh yeah, those threads are a bit rough. Yeah, it's still not all the way down. May have to work on that, get those threads running a bit better. Well, I had to lift that ring back out, clean the threads, and then it's screwed back down smoothly with no problems. So here we've got our lens. It's all smooth in action now. The aperture's nice and snappy. The depth of field pointers move nicely. They're even nice bright red, that one that I had to repaint. Probably I should have repainted its mate as well, but no one's going to look that closely. And that lens is ready to be used, and that could be used on a Retina Reflex or a Retina IIIS. Retina Reflex S, 3 or 4. The original Retina Reflex, of course, used the same C-series lenses as the Retina 3C cameras. So that's that one. That's our Retina Xenon 50mm f1.9 with the cam in the back to couple to a Retina IIIS camera, and that's the sort of lens you're most likely to discover. You may find a late model one like this. This one is serial number 10 million odd. It's got a much smaller hood at the front here. It's probably slightly different construction. Has no cam to couple to the rangefinder on a 3S, so this one's only suitable for use on the Retina Reflex S, 3 or 4. Or the Instamatic Reflex, but I don't think there are many people using Instamatic Reflexes just at the moment. This one, you can see that the hood's area here has been damaged. It's not round anymore. I don't know whether that would mount a filter. Quite possibly not. It's pushed in here, it's pushed in here. I will have a go at straightening that up, but how much success I have I don't know. I can certainly pull it rounder, but the thread is being rolled off here. Those threads have been crushed flat. Now, getting a filter to mount into that would be very difficult. I can probably improve the look of it, but I don't think you'd ever get a filter to mount on that, which is a bother and a nuisance, but there you go. But this is the lens that we'll deal with next. You won't be using this on a 3S, but you may be using it on a Retina Reflex.